Okay, so remember when I talked about self-esteem being a really big part of this? Those people who have the highest self-esteem experience the most dissonance when they behave in ways that are contrary to that high opinion of themselves. And they have to work harder to reduce it than those who have average self-esteem. Think about it this way. A person's on their high horse, they have a lot farther to fall, right? So when a person has a really high self-esteem, they have to work more to strive to keep their behaviors consonant or consistent with the view of themselves. So what that means is their justifications tend to be a lot more outlandish, and they have a lot more justifications. So you might ask somebody with average self-esteem, hey, hey, what you're doing doesn't really add up. I thought you were a good person and you didn't do this thing. Oh, well, and you might give a reason or two, justification. Now, somebody who thinks very highly of themselves, and you tell them, well, I thought you were a healthy eater, and you see them at like McDonald's scarfing down a Big Mac, they're going to be like, oh, well, let me tell you, I had a really stressful day. This week has been crazy. I have been, I ran out of time. Like their justifications are like a CVS receipt, right? Like a mile long. It's crazy, right? So those with high self-esteem have to work harder. Those with low self-esteem, they actually don't really feel as much dissonance because the distance from their self-esteem to thinking poorly of themselves is a shorter distance. And so, that's like a sprint. Whereas with a higher self-esteem is more like a marathon. You've got to do more justifications. So if a person thinks that they're stupid and they do something dumb, that's really closely consistent with the thoughts of themselves. So they don't really have to work very hard to justify their behaviors because they already think pretty low of themselves, right? So if a person that is like, I'm so dumb, I'm such a dummy, and then they do something stupid, and you're like, why'd you do that? They're like, I don't know, because I'm dumb. They don't really have to justify it. They don't have to meet themselves or work as hard or justify themselves because they're like, I don't know, okay? They're more consistent with their thoughts. And so they don't really have to do that kind of process of justification as hard or as much as somebody who is very, thinking very highly of themselves. As I kind of mentioned before, when we talk about rationalizing versus rational behavior, rationalizing is that process of justification. You're trying to rationalize what you did, but is it always rational? Are the reasons that you use to justify your behaviors always rational reasons? A lot of times they're not, because you are literally grasping at anything that's going to make you feel better. Okay. And so is it a rational thought to say that kid over there who has been struggling all year and has, been really trying to do better in math, and everybody's calling him dumb, right? Is it really rational to say, well, he deserves to be teased because he's dumb? No. But you rationalize it and justify it in a way that's like, well, he deserves it because he's not paying attention. When in reality, maybe he has ADD or ADHD, and maybe he, or he's on medication and he can't focus, right? So even though we are rationalizing our choices and our thoughts and our cognitions and our behaviors, it's not always rational. It's not always fair. So our need to maintain our self-image is often associated with rationalizing and justification over actual rational thought. Yes. Like, for example, oh, my dad was an alcoholic and I was abused as a child, therefore that's the reason why I'm abusing you. This kind of behavior is a justification process, which makes you feel better about being abusive. But again, what is the best fix to this situation? Change the behavior. Don't be abusive. healing and realizing and being cognizant of your behaviors, and instead of justifying it or rationalizing, instead engage in rational thought and say, you know what, this is not in line with my beliefs, therefore I'm going to fix the behavior. So that is the true, like, healthy fix to something like that. Is and sometimes what happens is those are the cases where we often find people have this light bulb moment in their life when they're told that their justifications are no longer valid, right? So they go to therapy because maybe it's court ordered, and they say, well, you know, it doesn't matter what your history is. It doesn't matter what your experience was as a child. It doesn't matter that you're a victim of assault. What matters is how you move forward, and to stop justifying your behaviors of hurting others because you were hurt. And a lot of times that's a light bulb moment for people, because they're like called out, right? It's dissonance. Yeah. And now their justifications, because this is right here, this word right here. What's the first word that you see on number 8? Successfully. To successfully change your thoughts is going to reduce dissonance. So if you call somebody out and they're no longer able to justify their behaviors because their rationalization isn't working anymore, because you're just, every time they say something, you're shooting it down, that is no longer satisfying the change, the discomfort that comes from dissonance. So now what happens is now they got to find another method. And that's where how you can engage in behavioral change, because now all their justifications don't work anymore. So now you have to engage in a change. Well, adding cognitions isn't working because the therapist is shooting all that down, and changing my cognitions isn't working because the therapist is shooting all that down. Okay, now let's engage in behavioral change. And so that justification process is gone now. Now they're changing their behavior. Yeah, and that's actually different kinds of counseling techniques, of getting people to acknowledge the kinds of things that they're thinking and the kinds of rationalizations that they've had and justifications, and bringing it out and saying, this isn't working anymore. Right. And then by doing that, you're getting the person to think differently about the situation. In fact, that's really how cognitive behavioral therapy works, is to change the person's thoughts around that behavior or around what's going on in their life. And that's a process. Cognitive behavioral therapy takes years for people to really engage in good behavioral change and healing, because it's a process of changing cognitions. It's a process of recognizing cognitions and changing behaviors. So yeah, those techniques are absolutely used to try to get people to understand that sometimes those rationalizations are not actually rational. Now, the last thing I want to talk about today, we're going to start on this, is the something we call the Ikea effect. Okay, so when you're making a purchase, all right, you're always going to experience some kind of cognitive dissonance if you have to make a choice. And the next thing that we're going to talk about after this class is about decisions and making choices and how that works. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Ikea, it's a store where it's a Swedish furniture store where you purchase the furniture and it comes in pieces. Okay, you have to put it together. And the instructions are usually like in another language. But so they're really cool furniture, and it's really pricey, but it's really cool looking. And so the Ikea effect came from this coin that they termed from Ikea, which is basically they have people put stuff together and then assess the value. And so that's why they call it the Ikea effect, is because you have to put stuff together for Ikea furniture, right? So the Ikea effect is this cognitive bias where a person is going to ascribe greater value to a product that they create compared to a product of similar quality that you purchase. So the idea is that if you have to create it, put it together, you're going to place more value on that product than if you were to buy it already assembled. Okay. And so it's also really closely related to another cognitive bias that we call effort justification. And so the idea is the more effort you put into a task, the greater value you're going to assign to the final outcome. Okay. So for example, there was a study that was done, and this is a study that was done a little bit ago, but it's still pretty relevant. So it's a 3-part experiment. So there were participants who built Ikea boxes. There was a group that folded origami and a group that constructed Lego objects. Okay. And so after each subject completed their task, they were asked to evaluate the worth of the product compared to something that was similar that was created by experts in the field. And so participants were willing to pay 63% more for the box that they created compared to the pre-assembled box that was at the store. And so what that is basically looking at all 3 things that were assembled by the person. Okay, the same effect was found across all three assembled projects. Okay, and so this increase in value was seen across all 3. And so what the experimenters said was that because one was a Lego and one was just a box, there wasn't any kind of creative or uniqueness. There wasn't a personalization effect. It was just literally putting together a box. And so when you are doing something that you put effort in, you're going to see that thing as more valuable than if you were to purchase the thing that somebody else put together. Because you're trying to justify the effort and time and energy that you put into that thing, which is why, like, when we redo furniture or redoing a room, we're going to see that a lot more value in that because we put our blood, sweat, and tears into it versus buying something already assembled and looking together. You're actually going to be more willing to pay more for the thing that you did and recognize the effort behind it than something that is of equal value in book value and equal same thing. Basically, you assign it greater value, which is why a lot of people value homemade gifts more than something that comes pre-assembled, because they recognize the effort that went into it. Absolutely, you're going to be much more willing to pay more money for something that you know somebody put those hours into versus something assembled at a factory.